The secret word is volley.
Hey, how's it going, guys? We are back with another episode of Modern Men. I believe we're up to 74 episodes. How did that happen? But my name's Carson. Oh my God, there's stuff in it. He just got back from Baltimore, so who knows if there's a crab cake hiding in there or there's something blue. Andy, how you doing, man?
I am definitely worked through, but we are back. We are in the dojo down here. We've been reading some books, but Baltimore was one for the record books, man.
And if this guy had a crab or crab cake in his beard, it'd probably kill him because of allergies. Drew, how you doing down there?
Well, I know for a fact with my history with Andy and Baltimore that there was at least half a short rib grilled cheese sandwich in his beard. He probably ate it on the 12-hour ride home he had through rain and all kinds of nonsense. Oh, man, that guy driving to Baltimore on a whim. Jesus. I was like,
That's crazy.
I might not even go, and I literally live 30 minutes away.
Tonight, we're going to be talking about, I know it's one of your favorites, Andy. Drew, I know you have experience with this one. Canto. I have heard so much about this book. This is kind of like almost a reverse episode of Modern Men, because usually like me and Drew will be like the experienced ones, and then we'll try to educate Andy on such things. This time it's like the roles are all reversed and jostled around. This was my first time reading Canto. Drew, I know you've read it a couple times.
This is actually my first time. I did read
Really?
issue 1 when it came out, but I never finished it.
Andy, I'm going to definitely go ahead and start with you here. You've been preaching this book for quite a while. Like, what was your first experience with this book? And like, what was that issue 1, like new comic book day feel like when you originally read this?
So my first experience with this book was being introduced to it through Simpleman's Comics and some interviews with David M. Booher and Drew Zucker that were happening there on YouTube and other social media platforms. And when I first picked up the book and first got into it, it was essentially like the Wizard of Oz and the Labyrinth gave birth to a hero, Canto. I was immensely drawn to this book because of the fact that there's not 30 layers of continuity in this story to understand or grasp and get into before you can get into this book with a fresh mind, not knowing anything about Canto, and enjoy it for what it is.
Now, did you pick this up weekly from there on out, or did you just go back and get the trade later on?
It was a monthly release and added it to the pull list and pulled every book ever since the beginning. And it's not dropped my pull list. They finished the first iteration of Canto. They moved on to a one-shot, Canto and the Clockwork Fairies. They moved on to Canto 2 and the Hollow Men. And now they're on Canto 3, Lionhearted. It's an interwoven story, right? And it's kind of tied together, but it's almost like little mini series within a big story.
Yeah, my thoughts on it are kind of the same. It's just kind of nice and refreshing to be able to pick up a book and, not really have to think about it too much. It's literally like a fairy tale on top of another fairy tale being told within this fairy tale that turns out to be a lie almost later down the line. And it's a very inspiring tale. I kind of like how you could pretty much give this book to anyone of all ages and they'll understand it almost the same and get the same reaction out of it. I think they set out to make a book for everybody, which is something that comics oftentimes nowadays especially fail to do. And I definitely respect the creators on this book for actually making a very entertaining and engaging book that you can give to a kid in grade school. I think he or she would appreciate as well. But what about you, Drew? What did you think finally getting a chance to finish the first issue?
Well, when I read the first issue when it came out, and it had a lot of buzz about it. So I gave it a shot. And to me, issue 1 is just your boilerplate, generic fantasy book. It was cute. The art was dynamic while being cartoony. At the same time, it didn't really have anything that grabbed me. I didn't see it really being anything special. The totality of 6 issues is beautifully poetic. It's basically the story of courage in the face of certain failure and how you deal with that. And the way that they use the inspirational story that he's heard a million times of this knight on this quest to save the princess, as it mirrors his quest in its own right. And how that twist comes towards the end of this book, it's a really great take on typical fantasy. And I think they do a really great job of setting you up for this is going to be something you know, and then slowly making it something that everybody knows, but something you've never seen before. And it's really, really well done. Very well-rounded, what I would call all ages book. A book for everybody. It's timeless too. I feel like it's not like Tolkien fantasy, and it's not your typical Legend of Zelda fantasy, but it lives in that kind of headspace.
Yeah, if I was going to compare it to Legend of Zelda, which it kind of just hit me when you said that, I would almost say it's almost Breath of the Wild-esque, where you don't know anything at all about the world until you finally step into it the first time. If you've powered on that game, you probably know what I'm talking about. You just kind of know your surroundings or your little pit or wherever you're forced to stay, and then you get a chance to leave that, and you have this whole world as your oyster now. What's it going to throw at you? He doesn't know what to expect at all. We really get that sense of adventure when the book starts out. Before we kind of get into the story breakdown, we've talked a little bit about just the story as a whole, but I kind of want to spend a second talking about the art, and I have to turn it back to Andy because you have a little bit of experience with this art, don't you?
I do. I've been eyeing Drew Zucker's art for some time. The cover was his first volley with Canto, and he even admits that he wish he could have done a little bit better on the cover, but we fell in love with Canto there on that first cover. And ever since that book, I've been following and watching his website and picking away, and I'm like, I'd really like to get into some of Drew's art. I'd really like to do my first volley. We've got a great indie book from a great group of great creators, and a great story that I'm falling in love with that I see as a tale that I could use to teach my son to read. So it really became kind of a family adventure when we started looking at this, and I noticed he had a lot of art available at the time. And then I started hitting him up, and we got into it. Probably, in my opinion, the most important piece of original art for Canto, and it's the last double page spread from issue 1, but it's also one of the first images readers get to see when they open the trade paperback. You open the trade paperback, it's one of the first images you see in the background behind a lot of the credits. It's the last 2 or 3 pages of issue 1, and it's the only double page spread in issue 1. And it's where Canto is introduced to the larger world that he has never seen before as a slave. So now he's open to this whole world that he has to venture into for his quest for a heart for his love. There's like coffee cup stains on this. There's like no joke. This is real art.
I know as a collector of cool things, like you own a lot of really cool stuff, Andy, but I think that may be your biggest piece in your collection. Drew, what did you think of the art here?
I'll be honest, that first issue for me, when I skimmed through it on New Comic Book Day, didn't really catch me. But the more time I spent with the art in this world, the more I really appreciated what was going on there. There's a lot of classic cartooning at work. There's a lot of storytelling through Canto's eyes. And there's a lot of really great storytelling panels with no dialogue in this book that take you on a journey. And there's that one big double splash, 4 panels across, them on a journey across a river, and then them having a campfire, and then them walking up a mountain. And then so you see the passage of time through these little vignettes in these panels, which is really, really great. The art itself is more than the sum of its parts, in my opinion.
Yeah, like my opinion on the art, at first, I didn't know if I was going to get another book like Headlopper or something like that, where I just didn't care overall for the art. But you mentioned it earlier, Drew, the eyes. When you can draw a good eyeball, then you kind of have my eyeball's attentions, if you will. When you can see when the emotions come through this almost faceless character, because he really only has his eyes to project most of the emotion, because most of the rest of his face is either like made of some sort of metal or steel. I don't think we really get a 100% clear answer of what he actually is made of throughout this whole thing. Kind of just looks like a suit of armor, basically. But he has to do a lot of storytelling using the character's eyes in this one. I think they do quite a good job with that, especially once you get outside the first issue. The story breakdown here, it's your classic fairy tale. You got a princess, more or less, that needs to be rescued. That's the secondary story they're telling you on top of the main story. The reality of this story is there's a culture, it's completely enslaved to the point where the characters, they don't even have names. So there's this like couple that they're slaves together. The little girl decides to give the little boy a name because she loves him that much, even though they don't have hearts. They have clocks that have replaced their hearts, so that way they can keep going through new workers once the clocks expire. But once the slavers find out the little boy has a name, they want to torture this boy, but the girl fesses up to the fact that she gave the boy a name, so she gets tortured and in a near-death state instead. So the only way she can survive is if she gets her old heart back, based on what the elder of the camp has told them. So Canto sets off to go find the heart of the girl he cares about to basically pay back this ginormous debt. The fact that he got a name out of this, but the person who gave him that name is on their deathbed, basically. So that's when he has to go break the walls down, basically, and go see what kind of wacky world they live in, because they have no grasp on why things are the way they are, which is great because, well, from a reader perspective, it's great because you're finding out along with Canto what this world is. And that's, classic storytelling 101. So that's pretty much the gist of issue 1 and issue 2 and 3 and 4. That's where it gets really interesting to me. That's when you start that world building that I love so much. So the first thing you see is this giant squid monster that can somehow shrink to like a little pebble size that has this weird creature in it. So Andy, what did you think of the giant yet tiny squid?
I think it's a great magical play inside of the world of Canto. It's kind of a world where magic has died a little bit and has been pulled back. So this is kind of like a good volley into that larger world as Canto experiences that there is magic still out there. Once they get into the hermit's cave, they realize that essentially this is the hermit's pet in a pond hanging out. And it's really actually kind of a cute little pet, but he makes them all big and scary thanks to magic. So it's just kind of an weensy, teensy little bit of world building to let you know that the magic in the world of Canto isn't dead. And this is one of your first parts to see it.
I love it because it really subverts the expectation of what he's going to encounter along this journey. You think it's a big monster, it's going to eat him. Ends up being a nice little respite for him and his Malarex, and ends up being quite a nice exposition dump for the reader as well. I love the fact that this friendly hermit ends up being of the same race of slavers that has enslaved him his entire life. I think that's very poetic that he is basically being schooled by the enemy, so to speak. He is still looking back on the story of the night, and he realizes that Knight trained. So when he has the opportunity to train, he's like, no, I'm not going to sleep. I'm not going to rest. I'm going to work hard and be better. Like you said, we're kept in the dark with Canto, which forces you to see him as a point of view character and also forces you to really empathize with what's going on with his journey. All around, the more this story gives you, the better it gets.
And I think the most important part of this scene is where the hermit does say, like, yeah, it's true, my race did enslave your race, but guess what? My race was slaves too, so you can hate on us if you need to, but we're in the same boat, more or less. He pretty much tells them there's one character throughout this whole thing that has just orchestrated how bad the world is, and he's the one pulling everybody's strings. So if there's a finger to be pointed, it's at this guy. So that's where the hermit sets Canto off on his adventure too, is like literally follow the yellow brick road to this giant green castle. So I don't know if anyone's heard that story before, but definitely a tribute there. But he has to go to this big green castle and find this hooded, cloaked figure, and maybe he will at least have the answers to how to get his girl's heart back. And next off, he runs into these two giants, which I don't know if this is supposed to be like your Rosencrantz and Guildenstern type characters, your Biggs and Wedge, if you will. Two giants that are literally in his way, the gatekeepers to this big kingdom. During this, he meets another hooded figure who turns out to be on his side. She actually has this like cool bird. She advertises herself as a trader, just needing to get into the kingdom. And basically she agitates the giants just enough to sneak by him. While they're arguing, she gets Canto in. So Andy, did you like the giants and this introduction of another new character?
I love the giants. I love the play on how this goes and how they get into the city. And for readers that are reading this for the very first time, don't fret. The giants do make a reappearance again. That's going to make you want to read more and get into other areas of Canto, because this was a very fun tit for tat, a very fun comedic enlightenment of a situation that is incredibly heavy on Canto.
Drew, do you like giants?
I like giants when they're like Statler and Waldorf. These guys were great. I kept reading them in like Nathan Fillion and Alan Tudyk's voices. I mean, this thing's been optioned, man. Cast those guys where they just kind of like workplace best friends that hate each other. You know, that's kind of the deal. And they don't have any choice but to spend time with each other because they're like buried up to their waist. Like they're cemented in place. All they got is these big sticks they can bash people's heads in with, but they're way too busy hating each other to be effective. And that was a little bit of kind of more mature comedy that I didn't expect out of this book, and it comes at the right time. There's a lot about this book that I love, and the giants are high on that list.
Allura, Canto, and their fun pets walk in past the giant guards. And Allura is going to go to this, like, it looks like a bar or something. She's going to try to find information on how we can get into this big green structure. And she's like, hey, I'll be right back. And the sun goes down. She's still not back. And by the time she gets back, there are 3 basically telepathic evil witches that have confronted our main characters. It's just solid action at this point where they're having to fight off these witches. So did this feel like a little bit of padded filler? Did you guys really dig the fight with the witches? Andy, I'll start with you.
It's hard to say. In issue 5, like you said, it's more panels with action and less dialogue. And to be honest with you, the first 4 issues, because this is issue 5, the first 4 issues was a lot of dialogue, a lot of world building. So actually, for me as a reader of modern indie books, this was kind of a welcome reprieve from world building to some action. Where in that point of a movie, you can sit back and not think as much and just kind of be entertained by the colors, by the art, by the panels, and by the characters' actions. So I actually kind of enjoyed this quite a bit.
I agree. It's the third quarter action break where there's the big battle or whatever. I think that what we did get out of the story here through the written word was really important, though. I think that sowing the seeds of doubt in Canto really comes to fruition when you find out who this, shrouded man is and why this story is important. I think that when you get that final twist, the fact that Canto still believes in his mission when he's being told against all odds that he is going to fail. He still has that courage and that hope and that belief in himself and the importance of what he's doing. Whereas the Shrouded Man ends up being exactly the opposite of that. And this stage, he's trying to tell Canto that they are the same without revealing it. You're getting the seeds of that planted here, and along with really great action that I really didn't anticipate in this book. Mostly, this is a book about a journey of self-belief. Issue 5 is really the only action in this book, and it is leaping off the page and really well depicted.
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed I also want to call it an action break. It definitely broke the flow of, it was almost getting a shade repetitive toward issue 5. So like you said, it's perfect third act structure. You finally got to have a little bit of conflict, a little bit of action. Plus, it introduces another wrinkle to their universe. Now you have like these telepathic evil witches that, like, when those things are going to pop up, things are going to get really serious, especially like his Chewbacca basically takes
Malarex.
Yeah, the Malarex pretty much just takes one of them out completely.
Straight eats that witch.
Yeah. So, if you see the other 2 pop up and say part 2, part 3, or maybe a part 4, they're not going to be happy with Canto and company or anything that looks like Canto. So hopefully, after they're losing conflict here, we see him again, and it's going to be action heavy once they pop up. So I really actually did enjoy this scene. But what I also enjoyed is Aurora. She basically is like, I got a way for you to get to the Green Tower. Here's my bird. After all of that, after fighting witches and being in this bar all day, the solution was, I had a bird the whole time. You're a little guy. You can use the bird to fly up there. So that's what he does, and it's great. He flies up there, and of course, the hooded figure, like statue, there's a statue of him and everything. And he basically explains, yeah, that story everybody likes? It's not true. And that's when like the whole thing crumbles. And it turns out the overlaying story about this knight in shining armor rescuing the princess from certain despair is the same knight in shining armor the whole time. So it was the bad guy was the good guy you thought in this tale. And he's just like, yeah, I didn't rescue the person I cared most about. So I've decided to remove hope and heart from the world. So that way people can't get their hopes too high. And a very one-dimensional villainous way to look at it, but it fits this fairy tale perfectly, in my opinion. So this is where Canto and his little clock heart get, as broken as one's heart could, I suppose. But how did you handle this big reveal, Andy?
I don't quite recall the emotions that I could draw up at the time because of how overwhelming it felt for that reveal. It was one of those things where it's kind of soul crushing. How does our little hero Canto get through this where the rest of us are like, oh God, that means everything I've done is almost meaningless. The wizard, the shrouded man, you see a knight who has failed in his quest. That's the last page of that issue and leads into issue 6. It's the shrouded man casting seeds of doubt in Canto to try to remove his hope and keep him from going on.
The motivation for Canto that keeps him going is this myth of this knight who went on this quest to save his beloved princess from the tower, goes to the tallest tower of the tallest castle, the tallest mountain, and saves her and becomes the king. That's not what happened, but that story drives him and encourages him along the way. The knight becoming the shrouded man because he couldn't cope with his failure is juxtaposed to Canto coming to grips with his failure and realizing that it wasn't a failure because he was the story that inspired Canto. So Canto can be the story that inspires other people. Canto's positivity through it is uncommon. That is the uncommon characteristic that puts him above the average Hobbit-like Clockwork Man, in a way that makes him a hero to others. I really dug it. I thought it was really well laid out, a little bit ham-fisted in its delivery, but it's it's an all ages story. It needs to be apparent on the face for somebody who's reading this who's much younger and not as well versed in vocabulary and nuance. So I really thought that it worked well in a broad sense and also in a pretty narrow poetic sense as well. Really cool stuff. Andy, I've got a question for you, and it's something that kind of just popped into my head right now. He's a robot, right? They're robots.
Is he though?
They're robots, and he is discovering human emotion as a robot. They never had hearts to begin with. I don't know if it's just something I'm imprinting upon it, but I get, there's that base level of this is a fairy tale. It's just an adventure story. Then there's that next level of kind of Dante's Inferno where his own evil is what inspires his greatness and his own greatness is what inspires his evil, right? So you got that kind of dichotomy working there. And then even more on top of that is this story about AI, like they're little robots. We never get the origin of their people, at least not in this story. Is that something they go into later on? Do we find out? Because they say at the end of this, they're heading off to where they originally came from. Do they just end up at a factory?
I'm not going to
making Roombas.
I'm not going to spoil it for anybody watching this that hasn't read Canto, but I will say there's a vastly large world of Canto that readers have not experienced if this is their introductory read, if they haven't seen anything else. And it's something that I'm really looking forward to because we are still only scratching the surface.
Well, I'm calling it now. They're goddamn robots.
Drew, when you talk about robots from the 80s, if you could at least insert like the robot from Short Circuit or maybe even a RoboCop.
Hey, Laser Lips! Your mother was a snowblower!
The story finally breaks down. He has his conflict with the cloaked, hooded bad guy, Shrouded Man. He pretty much gets his butt kicked, and you think he dies, but no. He ends up back at home in the hands of the Elder. And the Elder used some of the Shrouded Man's energy to kind of revitalize his heart. And he says it feels good. But there's been a tragic piece of news. He didn't have any hearts to find. So unfortunately, he did lose his girlfriend who didn't even have a name. So instead of putting her in, some sort of burning chamber, cremating her, whatever they do with these creatures, these robots, as Drew put it, she does get a nice burial by Canto. But the cool thing is, toward the end of all this, it didn't matter what the story he was telling was. His story mattered by the end of all this. He really encouraged his kind to overthrow their slavers to the point now they're all their pets and friends now while they were gone. They were encouraged by the two of them that left. So that they have decided to team up, and now they're just going to go find their home and figure out they're going to discover the world for themselves as well. And that's kind of where we leave our tale off for the time being. Andy, what did you think of the conclusion?
The conclusion was quite interesting because we see, like you've talked about, the Shrouded Man and Canto. Canto becomes imbued with some of the power from the Shrouded Man, right?
Oh, okay. So there is more to that than just revitalizing his heart.
Well, it's essentially what you're seeing is the revitalization of his heart is a portion of the Shrouded Man's power being imbued into Canto. You can connect some dots there if you want. There's more to be had there that is really exciting to read about. His entire journey to save the one that he loved didn't quite work out as we talked about. But what did work out is that now the time that he's lost, he's kind of been given back to do more with. This is definitely not where it ends.
Now I'm thinking about, like, what are they going to do with that power? I'm guessing they're going to need more of that power for his buddies. Speculation there on the next part of the story. But Drew, what did you think of the conclusion?
Oh, you got your nice somber ending, and you learn that his journey was successful, but not in the way he expected. Again, I see this as him mirroring the night because he's inspired by the night, but being able to cope with failure in a way that the knight couldn't. And that is strength, is being able to fall down and get back up, be able to move on. That seems to me that's what the bulk of this story is about. I think it was really well told. I mean, I'm going to go ahead and differ from Andy on this. I might have loved this story, but I feel like that's a great ending. They went back to the well, and maybe it's great, but I feel like this story would have diminishing returns if you were to revisit some of these characters. It doesn't inspire me to read more of it, but I very much enjoyed this package of 6 issues in a way that I did not anticipate.
Yeah, I'm kind of in between the two of you, I think. I wouldn't mind reading more, but at the same time, I don't think we need more. I feel like when they crafted this story, they crafted it for just the 6 issues. That's perfectly fine. There's definitely nothing wrong with, your one-shot type trade storytelling. I think they did a phenomenal job of that here. But they left the door open for a ton of opportunity here too. And I think
you got to think about where they were at when they were writing and creating this.
Probably a lot of questions.
Well, there's a lot of questions. Jesus, it's the dad thing I've heard in a while. But in all seriousness, that there were a lot of unanswered questions and unknown things for David and Booher and Drew Zucker when they were creating this. This could have potentially been their final volley. They had to create it in a way that if they weren't allowed another opportunity, it felt full. It felt completed. It felt rewarding. And I'll tell you what, that last bit of art in issue 6 is a double page spread, and it is the exact yin to the yang of the double page spread at the end of issue 1. If you look at this now, it's Canto looking out at the world again, but with the gates open and all of his people leaving and all of them becoming free. So they are now open to a whole new life, a whole new journey, a whole new level of freedom and not being slaves anymore. So as somebody reading this book stops and looks at that, it opens up an avenue for where could things go now. Yes, this story is completed. This is wrapped. But where can Canto and his people go next is exactly what that 2 pages delivers.
I kind of just think when that type of storytelling, I just think of George Lucas's original Star Wars. It's just like, you could have been happy just after the Death Star blew up and they're all celebrating, but you got to remember, Darth Vader's still out there, and so is this shrouded man in Canto. There's definitely a lot more to tell, but at the same time, they had to make that one story is that interesting, so it would get picked up, it would get published, and people would want more of it, obviously. And I kind of like the way it ended because, number one, like the girl dying, obviously that's never great, but it does kind of introduce the fact that like anything can happen going forward. If we're going to continue this, none of these characters are going to be safe, but yet we still keep readers in a safe space to where it's accessible to all readers too. So I respect them for making that choice toward the end for sure. Andy, what are your final thoughts? And how do you score this one? When you own the original art on this one, Andy, how do you score this one?
There are a lot of nuances and a lot of things to remember when scoring a book like this, because this is the first opening volley for a creative team that has worked together, but hasn't quite found their stride and hasn't quite honed in on a lot of their skills. I give this a solid 9.4, in my opinion. There's room for improvement in some areas, but it's definitely, when it comes to the story, when it comes to the meat and potatoes, what I need is there, and it's a very rewarding 6-issue series.
What about you, Drew? What are your final thoughts on this and a score?
A surprising 9.4. 9.4 is where I'm going to put this. I feel like this works in the way that a storybook should. Not necessarily a trade paperback, but a storybook. And I feel like when you read this as 6 issues, the art matches the tone. There's great comedy to be had here. There's fantastic heart throughout. It's a story of, coming to grips with failure. It's a story of finding inspiration where others do not. It's a story about inspiring others with your own courage. And that's something that is timeless. Yeah, man. 9.4.
I think I'm going to go 9.0. I was actually going to give it like an 8 or an 8.5, but just as we were talking about it, and kind of just a note for myself, I guess, to you guys, like when I was doing this like whole going around the horn asking questions, I didn't even have to reference the book. I just read it once and it was there. It stuck in my head that much. And usually anymore, a lot of stories don't tend to do that. So the fact that I read it and was able to pretty much accumulate most of the name, obviously minus names and such, like I'm not going to remember Shrouded Man for a while. They need to give that guy a name. But I got to definitely bump it up to a 9.0. I really did enjoy it. Do I want to read more? Like I said, I'm kind of on the fence in between your two opinions. I might go ahead and read it since I think I saw it was on Comixology Unlimited, but I'm not going to prioritize it. I did enjoy this story as a beginning and an end, like Drew did, basically. But yeah, very enjoyable. I'm definitely glad, your passion for this, Andy, definitely made us want to read it, I think. So I'm definitely glad you told the world about it with help from Brian from Simple Man's Comics. And yeah, it's definitely one I would recommend about every comic fan out there for sure, just to see what they think.
We were able to do an interview with David M. Booher and Drew Zucker on Mainframe Comic Con some time ago, and we hit some major talking points that you guys brought up here in tonight's discussion. The expression with the eyes and with the face being mostly covered, the ability that Drew has to create emotion with so little to work with, essentially, isn't much different than what we cope with right now with wearing masks as often as we do. And that was fantastic. You guys brought that up, and that was something that we touched bases on at the Mainframe Comic Con interview And those guys are just such a blast. I can't wait to have them on again.
Speaking of that interview, we're going to cut to that right now.
Tonight we're here. We're going to introduce these guests. Without further ado, we're just going to dive right in, because if I'm this excited, I'm pretty sure they're pretty stoked as well. So Mainframe Comic Con, let's give a really big welcome to the gentlemen, the creative team behind Canto, David M. Booher and Drew Zucker. Gentlemen, great to see you. How are you this evening?
We know it's all about him. So
how did this creative team come together in the beginning? Where did you guys meet each other? How did you further develop and become the team that you guys are today?
Well, I made the mistake of reaching out to Drew, and here we are.
It's true.
I'm just teasing.
Well, I've spoken like most people in my life.
Gosh, it was probably 3 years ago now. Almost going on 3 years.
Around there.
I had a short that I was doing, and I loved Drew's art. I came across him when he was doing The House with Philip Seavey, which was a Kickstarted book that they were doing on their own, which was gorgeous, horror book. And I reached out to him on this short I was doing, and he wasn't available because he was working on the house, finishing that. And then when he was done, he sent me the fateful message, which was, "I'm finished. Let's talk about some more stuff. You might remember it even better than I do." And he sent me a sort of concept sketch that would eventually become Canto. And I have to tell you, within about half a second of seeing this, I was like, I don't know who this is or what the story is, but we're telling it for sure. That's how drawn I was to what he did, that even concept art.
Yeah, so capturing emotion within Canto and the Canto verse, if you guys could touch base and kind of flesh that out for us.
When we did the initial design, it was designed very much on purpose that the facial grate would be of a design that if you shifted the angle of the camera and drew it correctly in perspective, you would actually develop essentially a smile out of it, or you would develop a frown out of it. So the design elements to it are very on purpose to work with getting what emotion we needed to out of the character. It's also why the eye ports are so big, is because that the two main ways that you're going to convey emotion with the character are the body language and the eyes. So to that end, it's really not the hardest thing in the world when, this is all I've kind of done for the last 10 years I've worked in comics, is how do you translate emotion out of a gesture? The book is just kind of the ultimate experiment of how well you can actually do that. And then you layer on top of it things like the colors and the lettering that Darren will do to it. And that just adds another layer to what we're doing on top of the script. But ultimately, it's very specific choices that were made in the design process from that original concept that David really insisted on driving before we even started drawing pages.
Well, you look at cover 1 of Canto. Those eyes draw you in. You see some concern. You see some adventure. You see some passion. The eyes draw you in. The colors and the cover sell you. The writing is what delivers it too.
I mean, I think what we do in the scripts is fairly close to what ends up on the page with minor adjustments. And the way I approach scripts is, it's a hard question, but at the end of the day, Canto is a character that I love dearly. I will fight to the death to defend Canto as a character. I love this comic. I love this story. It's what I love about comics. And so when I'm scripting, it's a lot of, well, what do I want to see as a fan?
Mm-hmm.
Do I want to see Canto just going out there? You read the first issue of Canto too. Do I want to see Canto just comfortably adjusting to being the leader of all of these people? Well, no, that's not the Canto we know. The Canto we know is going to be the crown is going to be very heavy for him. And he's constantly going to be second guessing himself. And that's the Canto that I want to see. So that's the approach that I take in scripting. There's always the reluctance, always the desire, the drive to do what's right. And so that's how I approach it. And I think Drew, probably you can speak to it. I'm sure you approach it a similar way.
Yeah, I mean, as far as scripts go, David's scripts are not quite Marvel method, but relatively detailed. Like there are panel breakdowns per page, and for me personally, it's one of those things where I like to tell him, give me everything so I can decide what I want to keep and what I want to throw out. Because ultimately, I'm not going to do anything that's going to change the story. If I have story concerns, I'll go to him early on and we'll talk through that stuff. But as far as once I have the finished script, it's how do I best serve what are sometimes extraordinarily complex actions, but are completely necessary for the story. It sometimes needs more panels than what he's allotted me. It sometimes needs less panels, so things will get combined. But ultimately, that script is, unless that script is like perfect in the spine, for me, I'm not going to be able to do anything with it. So luckily, he always gives me a good base to work out of, and then we just kind of branch off here and there and go to the end.
All right, that was an awesome interview, Andy. You did so good. That was awesome, man. If you guys want to catch that whole interview, Drew is going to link that down below for you guys, or you can catch it on the Mainframe Comic Con portion of the Comic Core website right here on YouTube. So definitely check out that whole interview. But Andy, where can people find you on the internet?
Wow, you guys can find me here on Modern Men when we get together and we read some of the best modern books and hang out and dissect them quite a bit, actually. You guys can find me on my own YouTube channel. You guys can find me on the Whatnot app if you're interested in hanging out there as well. And you guys can find me on IG at ComicManAndy.
What about you, Drew? Where are you available?
I just signed up for that there Whatnot app as well. I'm DruManchu on there. You can follow me. And I'm also DruManchu on the TikTok, where you can find me doing all kinds of dumb shit.
TikTok star?
I mean, Star is really pushing it.
My favorite TikTok so far, Drew, is just Chad playing with his back scratcher. So if you want to know what I'm talking about, go to DruManchu's TikTok, search his videos, and you're going to have a great time. But me, you can find me, Seawater19 on YouTube, on Instagram, the Xboxes, the PlayStations, even Whatnot. If you're not going to sub, at least get DruManchu down there to 100 followers. Of course, follow Andy. Andy actually does sell stuff on there. ComicManAndy on Whatnot. He has a huge page and a great following over there. So definitely give those guys a follow on Whatnot. You can catch on my channel. I'll be having the grand conclusion to the Harry Potter saga. My thoughts on what I thought of the movies as a whole. By the time this video comes out, that video should already be out. So you can watch the whole playlist of me watching Harry Potter's for the first time as well. And then I'll also be doing monthly haul videos. So I should have my October haul video out by this point. Some of my favorite reads I did in the month of October, as well as just the stupid pile of books I keep buying every single month, or multiple piles. I don't know why I keep accumulating books so fast, but I do. It's kind of my gimmick. Yeah, Drew has piles on piles down there. Follow him on TikTok. See what he has. But guys, thank you so much for joining us on Modern Men, and we'll catch you next time.
And I will will be adding a count to how many times Andy said volley tonight. It's been a favored word, and I just noticed how much you've been doing it, and I love it.
That's funny.